What are some of the basic things that you can do right now to protect yourself? So I'd love to know how you can identify a fake website. Is there anything else beyond the URL that would be a tell, perhaps? And I'd also like to know what people can do in terms of online safety. Should they use a virtual card that has a set limit, for example? What are some of the things that people need to do to just really stay aware and secure over Black Friday and Cyber Monday?
In South Africa, we have designed and agreed on the most common fraud typologies that we're experiencing. We've created a standard. We've implemented that standard amongst the institutions. And that's the book of work that we're working towards when we're trying to say, you know what, it's phishing scams this year. And it will change. Fraud evolves. It changes. It's not static.
Digital payments are growing fast, but so is fraud. Today on ITWeb Business TV, we're sitting down with Ursula Pearson-Williams, the head of fraud at PayInc, to talk about what needs to be done. How should people be aware of different fraud types? What should institutions be doing to try and mitigate the impact of fraud? What collaboration needs to take place between institutions and regulations? Today, we're going to dig under the surface and find out far more about fraud, especially in light of the incoming fraud week. So tell us a little bit more about what the fraud landscape looks like out there. What is it that people should be aware of, and why? Why should they be worried?
I think in South Africa, the introduction of digital payments, instant payments, is really evolved the sophistication and the evolution of fraud. Where in the past you used to have scams, opportunistic scams, you would have fraud and you would have money laundering, which were quite segmented and compartmentalized. What you're now experiencing is the combination and the complexity of those evolving together. So in a lot of the instances, in a single event, you can actually experience a scam and a fraud and a money laundering all in one value chain.
Yes.
And it's not only about that opportunistic approach anymore. It now seems to be far more organized. Fraudsters are developing and creating syndicates. They know their target, they research their target, and it's evolved from opportunistic fraud into a more staggered and purposeful fraud that takes place, which is always far more dangerous because ultimately they know more about you than you know about them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's really scary. So digital payments are, as we know, the fact that we can pay instantly is immensely beneficial. But equally, I think we're seeing financial institutions implement stronger and stronger restrictions, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to take advantage of that instant payment process now. So why is it that this landscape, this environment has become so hectic? What is actually driving this at the moment?
I don't think it's unique to South Africa,
Mm.
and I also don't think it's unique to the banking institutions. I think that the way fraud has evolved is that if you look at the other markets as well, they are experiencing the same challenges. If you look at the insurance industry, if you look at the telecoms industry, you're looking at fintechs that are coming in, the gambling industry. What's happening is that the evolution of fraud that has always been there is now becoming more prevalent. And also because it's being reported, we're becoming more aware of it. So the evolution of technology is not only the evolution where we can create the seamlessness and the evolution of payments, but it also creates the opportunity for fraudsters to use exactly the same technology that we're using against us. And unfortunately for us is that we work in a regulated landscape and fraudsters don't. They collaborate. They've got rules unto themselves, but we have to work within the framework that is provided to us because ultimately then we become like them.
Yeah, that's kind of scary, isn't it? Because ultimately consumers are, I mean, as you say, they know more about us than we know about them. Is this because our information is widely available? Like, how is it that they know more about us? And what are the kind of scams that people can or should be looking out for?
I think the assumption we need to make is that all our information that has been compromised, it is sitting on the dark web and it's ready to be sold. I think that is the first element that we should all consider, both at a personal level as well as an organizational level. And the second thing about the dark web is that you've got technology, but you've also got processes that are sold. So there's ready-made kits that youngsters who are interested in just playing around to see how things work can purchase off the dark web. And once you're hooked and once you get involved you then can become a fully fledged fraudster or scammer. And these activities that are freely available for people who may not necessarily have a career in line for them, because you also need to consider the economic status of our country from an economic stability, the vulnerabilities that exist, that these opportunities now exist for somebody. So in terms of scams, you mentioned AI and deepfakes.
Yes.
One of the most prominent up and coming in terms, it's been here for a while, but I think we're a little bit more aware of it. I don't know if you woke up in 2023 in January, and all of a sudden every single news article was around AI. It kind of like just happened.
Exploded.
There's been a lot of interest in around AI, specifically around pig butchering.
Did you say pig butchering?
I did say pig butchering.
Okay, I think I'd love you to explain that one.
So pig butchering is associated with romance scams. And there has been recent articles, and even South Africa, our participant banks have been involved in actually extraditing tourists who have gone over for job interviews to land up in almost what is known as scam centers, but that they are held against their will. And ultimately, they are being utilized to scam people around the world, either through telephonic, social media, and basically lure them into a romantic relationship. If they're online, they have utilized AI to change what their identity looks like, so their pictures and their profiles. And with the sophistication that they've got based on the information that they have on you, will profile you in order to change their profile so that you eventually grow to like them and eventually love them. And this whole process is not a quick process. Ultimately, they're luring you into a relationship to be able to extradite money from you in whichever means that they may, because now they have got you in a position where you've learned to trust them. That is the ultimate cause for, the ultimate tactic around pig butchering. The sad thing is that while it may be electronic and digitally orientated through social media, in the South African environment, there are reports where it is physically happening, so that you may actually meet your romantic scammer, and you may have and form a relationship with him only to find out in the long run that you're actually being defrauded out of all your money. It's happening to all age groups. The most vulnerable are the aged, and the second most vulnerable, believe it or not, are our younger children who are in school that are then being brought into these relationships. They get blackmailed because they've shown pictures of themselves, and in both instances there are reports of suicide. So people are losing their lives because of scams and syndicates and frauds.
This is terrifying. And so I think also another scam that I think is important to cover, and is obviously, I find it hard to top pig butchering, but push payment scams are another area where the market is there's a big red flag being raised right now. Can you tell us a bit more about what these actually are, how they work, and why we should be worried?
So push payment fraud is also very difficult to detect. So maybe we start there, because ultimately because it's one of the most prevalent scams that are taking afoot globally as well, is because of the willingness of the payee to make the payment. So when you profile an individual in order to ensure that your accounts are protected based on thresholds or whatever mechanisms and controls the participants put in place, the reality is that when you've made that payment, if it doesn't meet any of those thresholds, it automatically goes through. And the bigger challenge around that is, even though it may have breached some of the thresholds, which sends alerts to the fraud teams within participant banks or institutions, if they do make the call, the individual will actually confirm, no, but I do want to make that payment. Because what's happened in push payments is that through social engineering, through phishing, and through the proliferation of the sophistication and the maturity, it's very difficult to see a fake from a reality nowadays. So unless you know what you're looking for, it's very difficult for the average consumer to know whether that they're actually being scammed or not. Some people rely on their instinct, and that is a very good alerting point, to say, okay, fine, I don't trust what I'm reading, or I don't trust who I'm speaking to. And then there's mechanisms and approaches that we should take to follow through with that. But the thing about push payments is that once the caller or you've engaged with the individual, they push you into a sense of urgency. And because of that pressurization, it's very difficult for you to think through things in order for you to rationalize whether this is actually a scam, or if it's actually genuine. So this is the challenges that push payment scams have, and it comes through a plethora of avenues. It's not just a single identifiable, oh, I definitely know this is a scam. It can come through an email. And once again, if you don't know what to look out for, you're not going to be able to know whether that email is a fraudulent email or not. If it comes through a telephone call, the genuineness of the conversation, the compassion and the empathy that the individuals express through those telephone calls, which are confirmed by the information they have on you, almost forces you into a sense of security, or a false sense of security. And ultimately, you would land up processing the payment willingly, as opposed to knowing that it's fraud, and stopping that payment from going through.
That's so interesting because, yeah, they're building on a sense of trust, aren't they? Here, and a sense of familiarity. And then again, the FOMO thing, which is obviously a huge tactic. I mean, we've seen it used on all sorts of retail websites. Only one left. Buy now. It's going to end. So obviously, all of these scams, deep fakes, romance scams, push payment scams, all of these rely on a sense of trust and also a sense of recognition, which is why I think it'd be really important for us to talk about what do consumers need to know as we move into the holiday season. So we've got Black Friday coming up, we've got Cyber Monday coming up, we've got sales, we've got Christmas discounts. What are some of the biggest things that fraudsters do to kind of catch consumers unaware?
So especially for Black Friday and for Cyber Monday, you will have a plethora of fake websites going up. But I think more than fake websites is actually the advance fee for payments of goods that actually never arrive. So what you've got is you've got a whole lot of goods that are going on sale, and ultimately you're going to make that payment, and the goods will never arrive at your door. And that seems to be one of the most prolific that comes through Black Friday and the Cyber Monday. The second thing is really around the fake websites. So what you've got is you've got fake websites that look absolutely legitimate. In some instances, they're absolutely duplicating the genuine website. So what happens is that you think you're on a website, and I'm not going to mention any brands at this point in time, but you think you're going on to a legitimate website. But because you haven't looked at the legitimacy of the URL, you're actually on a fake website, and you're making the payment through there for those goods that actually will never arrive either. They're not actually for sale.
So if you don't check and you go through the whole process, not only are you not going to get the fridge that was really wonderfully discounted, but now they've got your card details. So what are the deeper risks that come with the spoofing sites? Because it's not a bee that just stings once. It's more of a what is that insect? A hornet that just keeps on stinging,
Absolutely. And that's a very good point, because, where ATM scams and card scams used to be quite simplistic in the fact that they stole your card, or they skimmed your card in an ATM, or they've walked past you and they've scanned your card. Now what's happening is that you're online, you're sharing your details willingly. So that's the first thing that consumers need to be made aware of, because if you have done that legitimately, or thinking that you've done that legitimately, it's very difficult for your bank to now navigate through the process of looking for your funds, refunding you, because ultimately you've gone on and willingly provided your details.
Yeah.
But once you've been made aware of that, or once you're concerned that potentially, or you've become aware that you've been scammed, it really is to contact your bank. The first thing to do is, if you do get an SMS or a caller saying that somebody is phoning from your bank, my suggestion is do not answer those telephone calls. Rather, put down the phone and then use the telephone number that you know of that is either on your bank's website, or if you have a personal banker, contact them and therefore go through to a legitimate number
Okay.
that is actually your bank's fraud center. Provide them with all the details, because generally what happens as well, they're able to link accounts. A lot of the time, it's not only about fraudsters accessing your information externally, it's potentially who they're working with internally as well. And there has been reports where your credit card potentially has been compromised, but because it is linked to your bank account or your check account, there is a link that your check account can be compromised as well. So it's not just about isolating the event to either an account or a check account. It's understanding your financial makeup, how your accounts are linked, because potentially if they do have that information, they're able to link that as well.
Sure, that is scary. So, I mean, what can customers do? Well, I mean, consumers do. What can consumers do? What are some of the basic things that you can do right now to protect yourself? So, I'd love to know how you can identify a fake website. What are some of the key elements? Is there anything else beyond the URL that would be a tell, perhaps? And I'd also like to know what people can do in terms of online safety. Should they use should they use a virtual card that has a set limit, for example? What are some of the things that people need to do to just really stay aware and secure over Black Friday and Cyber Monday?
The websites are not always so easy to detect. However, there are some very simplistic mechanisms that you can use. The first one is read the language that is used on the website. Is it professional? Is it written in a way that makes consumer-friendly sense? And is it done in a way that is actually displaying the product and the goods and describing them accurately? A lot of the times, these fake websites are designed very, very quickly. And you'll be able to see, if you look really closely, the little flaws that are actually quite, prevalent in them, in order for you to be able to go, wait a second, this website doesn't look legitimate. Secondly, look at the contact page. What are the contact details for this website? Does it have a fraud helpline? Does it have a contact center, a support line that you potentially can phone? And then check the number and the addresses to ensure that they actually do exist. Because a lot of the time you get websites where there's a contact page, but there's just an email address. There isn't any additional information that you can lean on if something does, go awry. And then, like I said, the URL also is, check the URL. If you're in South Africa, it should be a South African URL. If it is a .com, then do the other checks to ensure that the organization is legitimate and that the goods are available. I have a trick. It doesn't always work. I go on to hellopeter.com to see if there's any reviews about that particular website. And generally, that's also a good aid to see, if people have reviewed that website, what is their experience with that website? Have your goods arrived, on time? And if they have to arrive, because people are becoming far more vocal and far more expressive about being defrauded.
They are. And I think that very neatly takes us to looking at the flip side of the coin, which is how do financial institutions, telecommunications providers, retailers, etc., companies, how do they minimize the friction between the consumer and fraud? What are some of the things that need to be done to help them to become a little bit more supportive of customer shopping? Because, we all go a little bit like, ooh, look at that amazing discount, and we're busy and we're tired. So we're going to make mistakes. We're human. So how can retailers and other companies just kind of step up and help?
I think there's two parts. I think consumers, it's a dual responsibility. I think we've moved into an era, because of digital payments, because the evolution of payments, because of that instant gratification, that there is some level of responsibility that a consumer should take in terms of their own education and their own awareness. But saying that, it's also the responsibility of their institutions that are providing the services and the mechanisms in which to be able to provide instant payments and or different payment channels, but also those services to educate the customer. So in the last year or so, you would have found that a number of institutions across the markets are creating programs for consumer awareness around fraud, specifically payment fraud. So I think that from a consumer awareness point of view, that's really, really important, so that the consumer can take responsibility, but also the institutions have a responsibility to educate the consumer. We have a very diverse culture and society in South Africa. While everyone may have a cell phone, not everybody understands the risks that the cell phone does bring into your environment, not only from social media and the accessibility and the risks associated with that, but also the fact that you can now make a payment on a device that potentially opens up different avenues for vulnerability. So there is a level of responsibility from both sides. On the second is a little bit more difficult, but it is beginning to happen. And I'm really encouraged by the fact that the regulators from each of those industries that you have mentioned are beginning to talk. We were very isolated, each one holding each other accountable for the different types of fraud. Didn't matter where it started, doesn't matter where it ends. But now you're beginning to see some collaboration, not only from an understanding perspective, but also from a regulatory and from a policy change point of view. And I think the reason for that is that while you will have scams like gambling and online scams and crypto asset scams, those are also mechanisms used to money launder. So it's not only the scam that takes place, it's now a mechanism to actually move money around. So the significance and the risk associated with that from an economy perspective is beginning to filter through, and you are seeing a lot more collaboration.
And the value for both companies and individuals is? Like, how does that deliver value for everybody, this collaboration? I'm just curious.
If you take your personal motivation for loyalty, I think I've seen that loyalty is reduced over the years, especially with the younger generation. It's about, what am I receiving? And therefore, I will be loyal. Whereas the older generation will buy the same brand, bank with the same bank. But because of your economic conditions, because of the different services, the diversity of the services, and because life changes, loyalty now is beginning to change as well. You're going to go where potentially there is something more valuable for the money that you're spending or for the services that you're receiving. It also is your drivers. So if you're more security conscious than conveniently conscious, you will align yourselves to an institution that gives you what it is that you're particularly looking for. So in terms of brand and loyalty, I think that the biggest element is trust. Can I trust you with my driver for the time and the season that I'm wanting that? Because as I'm, change and mature, and as my lifestyle changes and mature, I will change and mature. But ultimately, it's an evolution. It's a cycle. New consumers will come through, and word of mouth is always important. I think there's something in South Africa that we're beginning to acknowledge and stand up, is that because people are using their voice, your marketing is now coming from word of mouth more than it is coming from a billboard.
It's very true. And word of mouth is transformative, right?
Correct.
Yeah. A billboard might seal the deal rather than actually start it, which is so interesting. Okay. And so, earlier on you mentioned that these issues are not unique to South Africa. They're not. But what are some of the global best practices or global approaches that are currently being used that we could benefit from?
So when it comes to South Africa, you'll hear a phrase that we will look globally and internationally, and we will certainly research. But the question is, what is best for South Africa because of our uniqueness of our society, because of our economic challenges and the diversification in South Africa? While frauds may mutate in a way they may be common globally, there are some very unique frauds to South Africa as well. So when we look at the best practices, we look at them in the context of how can we change them and then filter them into South Africa as opposed to just copy and paste and adopt them. But we are looking at other countries that have very similar society challenges than us. So you've got Brazil PIX. You're looking at how they are actually managing the fraud. And it's about lessons learned more than it is about, oh, I like that policy. It sounds good. I think it can work in South Africa. But what's more important is where it has been adopted in those countries, how well has it worked? And what are the lessons learned? And how have they evolved what they've done and implemented in order to make it the best practice? So there is a lot of initiatives that have taken place globally. The first one is, well, not the first, but one of them is the Brazil PIX. How they structured their operational framework from a country perspective in terms of creating committees that look at risk and fraud, and how have they filtered that back into their design of their instant payment solution. Then you take a look at the UK and you look at the mechanisms that they implemented way after instant payments was launched, 12 years ago now?
Yeah.
You're now looking at confirmation of payee. So you're looking at what is that mechanism? Has it reduced fraud? Has it mitigated? How has it brought the consumer closer to the bank in terms of the shared responsibility? I believe that report comes out now at the end of the year, so we'll have some good learnings from that. And then you look at other countries which are far more mature in their approach. You look at Malaysia, you look at Australia, who've implemented consortiums like anti-national scam centers. They've actually built scam centers where there's a consortium and a policy and operational framework to help consumers directly in support of their banking institutions. So there's definitely a whole lot of initiatives that are happening globally that we're looking at and that we are adopting in relation to pulling out what will be beneficial for the South African environment.
And on the flip side, I would like to say this because I do think we have a lot to be proud of. What are we doing that is leading the world in terms of this area, digital payments, fraud protection?
Our centralized capabilities are quite advanced, and they have been for a while. And I think one of the biggest accolades is that while we may have, and I use the term very lightly, an immature society when it comes to financial payments and instant payments, with PayShop only being released 2 years ago, is that ultimately both from a fraud control, a integration into our participants and the collaboration at that level is far more advanced than in some international countries around the world, which we can be very proud of. There are other elements as well in that one of the key areas is around what is the actual fraud problem in South Africa. And in order to be able to identify that, you're really needing a common book of language that you're working, towards and against. So in South Africa, we have designed and agreed on the most common fraud typologies that we're experiencing. We've created a standard. We've implemented that standard amongst the institutions. And that's the book of work that we're working towards when we're trying to say, you know what, it's phishing scams this year. And it will change. Fraud evolves, it changes, it's not static. But what it does is it gives us a benchmark because we're wanting to move away from the reactive approach that we've always had with fraud prevention, now moving into the proactivity. Can we see what's coming down the line? And it's that collaborative piece of work that has really evolved over the last couple of years, that has really just put us a little bit of ahead in terms of taking the lessons learned from the internationals, communicating and working with them, but also looking at South Africa in terms of what do we need to do from a South African perspective to ensure that we can prevent fraud from happening.
Yeah, and actually, this proactive approach versus the reactive approach obviously has numerous benefits. But one of the things that I think you've really opened the door for so nicely right now is what should institutions be doing now? What should they be thinking of for the next, I would say, 12 to 24 months? What are some of the things that they really need to be aware of or planning for, considering so that they can maintain this proactive approach?
The institutions are doing a lot.
Okay.
And I think that the more fraud evolves, I think that they, based on their customer base, based on their products and services, they know that best. It's the collective that we need to focus on in the next 2 years. It's how does the collective community and across the markets come together to create a standard that is a minimum risk standard. And what I mean by that is that we never want to restrict either the consumer from having a good customer experience by putting so many fraud controls that it creates the friction. But we also need to understand that we need to protect the consumer and protect the institution at the same time, because it's not one or the other. So what it is, it's about coming together as a community to say that individually, you know your customer, you know your products, and you're doing well within that regard. But we know that the weakest links will create a chain reaction, and because fraud moves. So while you may be doing it well, all that's going to happen is fraud's going to move to the next institution. So collectively, we need to come together to say, what is that minimum risk criteria and control that we want to collectively implement? And then you can individually go and create the tiers for your specific customer and market. The second thing is we can do that, but regulation and legislation and policy does need to change. At the moment, as well adopted as papaya is, it does cause some restrictions from a fraud community across the entire value chain. So when we're talking about institutions, now we're actually talking about, well, once that fraud is being committed, we have to go into the criminal and justice system. We have to get the SAPs involved. We have to get the hawks involved, depending on the type of crime that's being committed. We have to get into the legal aspect of that. So how does policy and legislation help us across that value chain that supports the operational activity that's happening on the ground in order to be able to close out the event that's happened? So what we've got is you've got the proactive approach happening within the institutions. You have a collective approach that needs to happen with the institutions, but don't ignore the value chain from the end-to-end fraud prevention and detection perspective.
Yeah, we need to keep every link in the chain as secure as possible and as aware as possible, I guess, which is also absolutely critical. And, I think this conversation is obviously taking place at a most opportune moment. We have Fraud Week, right? And Fraud Week is an opportunity for us all to have this conversation and just be slightly more aware. You're tired, you're busy, you're stressed, you're running a massive business. What do you feel consumers really need to take away from this conversation as we talk about fraud? What do they need to take away so that they feel protected, so they stand firm as their link in the chain?
Breathe. And what I mean by breathe is you've touched on the point, right? We're tired. We're also excited about the fact that it's almost holidays.
Yes.
And what happens is in our rush, in our everyday life, we forget to breathe. So when you're making a payment, when you're online, when you're standing at the ATM, or when you're speaking on the phone, just take a moment to ask the questions, does this sound or look right? Because it's in our rush that actually the mistakes begin to happen. And so the first thing for me is just be still and breathe. And that's just it. There is absolutely no rush. So taking that instant gratification and just slowing it down a little bit. The second is be conscious of your environment. I think that we still have a predominantly cash environment, even though ATM seems to be far and few between. Just take a look at your environment. Look who's standing behind you and on the side of you, and make sure that you just cover your card when you're putting in your PIN number, just to ensure that there's an extra level of security. And then the third one is that if you are going to get an SMS, double check that telephone number. Don't press on that link, whether it be on an email or whether it be, rather go to your official banking site and take a look at that email address, take a look at that cell phone number and make that call, return that call. You do not have to answer the questions. You do not have to provide your information. And talking on that note, at no point provide your ID information or your accounting details to anybody that's phoning you. No banking institution will ask you for that information if they've phoned you up front. And if they do ask you information and you feel that this shouldn't be the information that you're asking, take their details down and then phone your bank to say you've received a call and you would like to share the details or update them accordingly.
Okay, that is amazing. Thank you so much, Ursula. So those are basically the best tips that you can all take away from this session. Breathe, check, and pause and phone back. Thank you so much, Ursula. That was amazing. I really appreciated having you on this on the show today, and I think you have shared some amazing, if terrifying, insights with everyone. And hopefully, everyone will walk away a little bit more informed.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure being here today.